In conversation with Patty Blount. Patty Blount grew up quiet and invisible in Queens, New York, but found a voice writing smart and strong characters who fight for what is right. Today, she's an award-winning author of realistic contemporary and young adult fiction that pack an emotional punch. Still introverted, she gets lost often, eats way too much chocolate, and tends to fall in love with fictional characters. She also loved delivering writing craft workshop, keynote speeches, and talking to book clubs. Pat is best known for her 10 novels including Send, 2012 Junior Library Guild 4 Peak, Some Boys, 2015 CLMP Firecracker Award Winner, RWA Rita Finalist, and Someone I Used to Know, 2019 Double YARWA Athena Award Winner, 2018 Junior Library Guild Gold Award Winner. Our latest novel, The Smell of Smoke and Hash, is our first paranormal novel. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement to have on the show today, Patty Blunt. How are you doing today, Patty? Welcome on the show.
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing very fine too. It's quite lovely here. The sun is shining and it's quite energetic.
Good.
It's very lovely to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah. I wanted us to start today's conversation by your book, the one titled The Smell of Smoke and Ash. I would have actually started from Some Boys, yeah, but I wanted to take it a bit further, yeah, because I particularly love the description of that, the smell of smoke and ash. Yeah, I wish we happened to talk about it last week, actually, yeah, on the show. So I wanted to ask you, what inspired the making of that book? How does it come to be?
This is one of my favorite stories. So I tend to get most of my ideas
Mm,
from stories that I read in the news.
mm,
And many years ago, before I ever wrote a single novel, I read this very interesting story about a woman who attended a family reunion, of all
mm,
things, right? Extended
mm.
family reunion. And there were about 100 people there of distant cousins. And
Wow.
she zeroed in on a little girl about 4 years old
Mm.
and just knew that child was the baby she thought died as a newborn in a house fire. She
Wow.
was so certain of this that she actually plucked a hair from the child's head and had it tested and
Wow.
discovered she was correct. Her cousin was the one who set the fire and stole her baby.
Wow.
So I was so intrigued by how a mother could actually recognize a baby 4 years later and know it's hers in her heart.
Hmm.
That story never let me go. And I
Wow.
actually wrote this book. This is probably the fourth or fifth time I've written this book. I tried
Wow.
writing as an adult story, and
Oh,
it never
wow.
got published. Yeah, it never got published. Nobody wanted it. It was called Postpartum Deception,
Hmm.
and I couldn't sell it. And then years go by. I'd written a number of other novels, including Send, which was my debut as a young adult author.
Wow.
So once that was published, I said, you know what could work? Maybe I should try rewriting Postpartum Deception as a young adult novel. And
Hmm.
that's where this was born. So I gave my original main character a surviving child who
Hmm.
grows up and discovers that he is still somehow psychically connected to his missing brother and
Wow.
his now deceased father.
Hmm.
And the whole story is about that sort of love, how even death can't break those bonds.
Oh, wow. That is so
Yeah, it's
cool.
one of my favorite novels. It really is. I love the whole story. I love the premise of being so convinced, no matter how much logic tries to
Hmm.
dictate reality, you know in your heart that you're right, and you will move
Hmm.
heaven and earth to prove it.
That's so lovely, really. I love your take on that. It's so amazing, so beautiful, so fun. It's so compelling, really. That's one of the reasons why I feel like I would love us to start this conversation with the smell of smoke and hash. And even the title itself is quite idiomatic in nature, one that tends you to want
Yeah.
to find out exactly what the book is all about. The smell of smoke and ash, which I find to be quite beautiful, quite uncommon as well. Very much uncommon.
Well, it's actually very important to the main character. Riley in this novel is experiencing these sort of psychic phenomenon.
Mm,
He has visions of his dead father, his brother, who he also believes is dead,
mm,
and his visions seem to be triggered by scent. So that's why the title comes from the smell, right? So
Yeah.
everything by scent. And it turns out that our memories are very strongly prompted by odor. So
Interesting.
whenever he smells smoke, he thinks of his father. Whenever he smells freshly cut grass, it reminds him of a particularly touching moment between him and his father when his father told him he was proud of him.
I
So
love
all of
that.
these like scents spark different emotions in him.
Mm,
And the ash one is the one that he's most concerned about because to him it feels like he's being punished, and he has to
mm.
get past that to find out its true meaning, which I can't tell you, or that
Yeah.
will divulge the
Spoilers.
secret, right?
Yeah. Mm,
So he has to actually decipher all of his father's clues, which are coming through as different odors.
mm,
And for him, it's extremely tough because he's very skeptical. He doesn't believe in life after death. He doesn't believe in paranormal ability. He doesn't believe in any of this, but yet he's experiencing it. So he must
mm.
first face the fact that, okay, this is real and I'm not crazy. I'm not sick. So it must be real. So he spends a
Absolutely.
good portion of the book kind of arguing with himself over that. And then once he opens his mind, he's able to discover the message his father's trying to send him.
Wow, I love that so much. I
Thank
love
you.
that. And I can now tell where the title comes from. The smell of
Good.
smoke and
Mhm.
hash. Quite
Yes.
beautiful. And also,
Thank you.
Party, your books tackle some really tough and important topics like bullying,
Yes.
consent, trauma, and quite a lot of it, really. I wanted to ask you, what draw you or what drew you to these themes? And how do you balance the emotional weight of the story with keeping readers engaged? Quite curious about that, really.
That is a really great question. To be honest with you, I feel like reading novels, reading books in general should always
Mm.
pack some sort of emotional punch.
Absolutely.
And they don't always have to be dramatic. They don't have to be
Mm,
negative. They could be
mm,
happy. I love to write romance because they usually end happy. But when I was first starting out as a writer, my children were still home and living here. They've now flown the nest,
mm,
but I had sort of a built-in ready pool of angsty teenage issues to
yeah.
tackle because they were experiencing them firsthand, including bullying.
Mm,
And that's actually how Send was born. Send is about a bully because I nearly lost my oldest son to suicide
mm,
because he was being bullied. And once we got through that whole situation,
yeah.
I decided, okay, I think I would like to write a story from the bully's perspective, because my son was also accused of being the bully
Oh,
after a
wow.
whole year of being victimized. The following year, he was accused of being the bully, and that just wrecked him. He was destroyed
Wow.
by the thought that anybody could think that he would willingly inflict that sort of pain on somebody else after he just survived it. So
Mm,
that's what gave me the idea for Dan in
wow.
Send. And that book still has an emotional connection for me. I feel like Dan is one of my children.
Oh, wow. I love your take on that. That's so beautiful and quite amazing to know, really. Thank you so much for sharing. I love your
Yes, thank
answer to that particular question. Now, I wanted us to go back now into the book titled Some Boys, whose description
you.
as
Boy,
well is quite lovely and quite beautiful to me. I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to write Some Boys? How does it come
oh,
to be? Which one
that one,
really got
that
there?
one is another story that came out of the news. And so, one thing to know about me is that I have a foul temper.
Oh,
And there was a news story that so completely infuriated me, it inspired this entire novel.
wow.
So here in the States, as I'm sure you're aware, because it's very hard to escape all of the political nonsense that we're experiencing here right now, we actually have a sitting president who has been credibly accused of sexual assault. So we
Mm,
have a sexual assault problem here in the States where it seems that I find most people find it easier to make excuses for the perpetrator of this crime while simultaneously blaming the victim instead of the other
mm,
way around, which is let's help the victim and let's vilify the people who actually committed the crime.
mm.
So in I believe it was in the state of either Ohio. I can't remember if it was Ohio or Maryland, but regardless, there was an
Yeah.
article some years back before the book was written in which a young girl was raped several times by people she grew up with. These were boys in her class that she had known since her primary grades.
Mm.
And now they're about 15 years old, 16 years old. And there was a party in which she got drunk.
Mm.
And rather than help her when she passed out, rather than see her home safely when she passed out, rather than
Definitely.
seek medical care when she passed out, these four boys decided, oh, I know what will be fun. Let's have sex with her. Again,
Mm.
without her permission, without her knowledge, without her consent. Worse, they videotaped it. So not
What?
only was she
Wow.
victimized physically, sexually, but then she had to experience the emotional impact of this because it got
Mm.
passed around to everybody in school.
Internet. Wow.
So when this went to trial, our media in the States kept covering the story as if these four boys were pillars of society and we don't want to ruin their lives with this one night of a bad mistake. And she shouldn't have been drinking, and she shouldn't have gotten drunk, and she shouldn't have dressed suggestively, and she shouldn't have been hanging
Mm.
out with these boys. It was always
Mm.
her. And I lost my mind over this. I became
Mm.
so angry over that I literally wrote the entire book in about a month and a half
Wow.
because it poured out of me. And it's quite honestly taken from that situation. Grace and some boys gets drunk. She's taken advantage of, and the entire assault is recorded. It's shown to everybody at school. Everyone ostracizes her, but nobody holds her rapist accountable. So I decided in this story that I wanted to tell it in dual points of view. And I remember having a conversation with my editor at the time, and she said, oh, hold on. Please tell me you are not planning to make the rapist the hero. And I said, no, I'm going to make his best friend the hero. I'm going to make his best friend have to choose between Grace and the guy who attacked her. He
Mm.
has to decide which one is telling the truth. And as the story unfolds, we discover both of them are telling the truth as they see it.
Mm.
And that's part of the thing that I wanted to, that's part of the story I wanted to tell, that I feel that too many, especially young men, don't understand what consent actually is, because I don't think we're doing a really good job of teaching this.
Mm.
Right. So as long as Grace is unconscious and she can't say no, therefore it's okay. No, that is
Mm.
not consent. Consent needs to be an enthusiastic yes,
Mm.
participated. Right. So I make sure that I got that message across, but I wanted to do it in such a way that it doesn't feel like I'm lecturing or I'm scolding, right? I wanted this to still be a novel, and I just wanted to tell that story from another perspective because ultimately I still wish to entertain people.
Yeah.
And this book, by far my most successful novel, I am still getting mail to this day. This book was
Uh,
published 10 years ago. I still get
wow.
mail from people telling me how much it helped them. It helped them find the courage to report their own attacks. It helped
Mm.
them find the courage to stand up for people who were being ostracized
Mm.
because a popular group of kids decided they were the bad guys in that story. And
Yeah.
I've even had football coaches tell me that they feel it should be required reading for their teams.
Mm.
That one, as well as someone I used to know, which deals with similar subject matter.
Wow.
The difference between the two stories is that Grace in Some Boys is trying to get somebody to believe that she was raped. It wasn't as if she said yes and then changed her mind and tried to get people in trouble. So it was more of a he said, she said story. In Someone
Mm.
I Used to Know, there is absolutely no doubt that there was a sexual assault that took place. And that one covers the aftermath. What do
Mm.
you do and how do you heal from this? Even though the attacker went to prison, you discover it's still not quite enough and you don't feel whole. So, how do
Mm.
you heal from that? So, they're
Wow.
two different sides of the same sort of crime.
Wow. You've got a lot ongoing in there, really. I love the fact that you've went so deeply, extensively answering that question. I love what you've shared so far. This should be a recommended reading for teens. I think they need to be aware of things like this, things of this nature. And hilariously, I think I told you last week, really, I just finished reading a book about sexual assault as well. And most of the things, some of the things that was really portrayed and mentioned in the book by the writer is the fact that most victims are being blamed. Like, why were
Yes.
you there? Why do you
Right.
dress that way? Why, like you mentioned, why were you drunk? Why were you going
Because it's
out in the middle of the night? One of the things I read is somebody was taking a walk by 11 p.m.
yeah.
and we're like, well, you never knew. You're just taking a walk. You never knew that your walk is gonna lead you to something else. So,
Right.
and why they keep blaming the victim? Why not saying anything about the perpetrators?
That's
Unbelievable.
that's a quote. That's an ongoing theme in some boys where I talk about easy versus right. Easy versus right. And Grace is forced to make that decision quite often. And so is Ian, our hero.
Mm,
And I feel that just, when we talk about things like toxic masculinity, so many opponents of that phrase believe that it's women attacking all men. And we're
mm,
not. We're not. We certainly don't hate all men, right? That's not what this is about. We're trying to get men to understand this hurts you too, right? This
mm,
sort of this whole toxic masculinity where you have to prove your manhood, you have to prove your masculinity. You should
mm,
not be required to prove anything to anybody. So I feel that we're doing a disservice to our young men, right? That's where I feel that this should be required reading, right? Because it's coming from dual points of view, right? So I have
absolutely.
male, I have the female, I have the victim, I have someone who was sort of, he wasn't present, so he wasn't a witness to this behavior,
Mm,
but the rapist is literally his best friend. So
oh,
he's torn
wow.
between being loyal to him, believing his side of the events, and also having to be forced to face Grace's side of events. And he eventually
Mm,
realizes that Grace is the one telling the truth.
oh,
And
wow.
that completely shakes up his entire worldview
Mm,
because this means that everything he thought he knew about his best friend has been wrong, right?
wow.
So this is not somebody who's worthy of emulation or adoration or even respect. It's somebody who
Mm,
belongs in prison, right? So
wow.
these are some of the things that I like to talk about when I address students, when I talk at schools or in my keynote speeches.
Mm,
That toxic masculinity is definitely something that hurts all of us. It's not just women who are trying to be super feminists.
mm,
It's not. We're trying to shed light on a situation that puts young men in trouble too.
mm. Oh,
Holding
wow.
them up to completely unrealistic expectations of what masculinity really means.
I love the balance of it. I love the balance you've just mentioned. Quite beautiful. Thank you so much. And also, I see
Yeah,
that you have another book in the name of Mr. Foes, which is your
mistletoe.
latest
Yeah.
one. And I must
That
say
is
that
my
it is
newest
quite
novel.
different. It is quite
Yeah,
different from the heavier themes in your previous works, yeah? What was it
that's
like
very different.
switching gears from writing
Oh,
something more light-hearted? Can you tell us about the
so much
making of that as well?
so much fun. So, as I mentioned, my children have grown up and they've left the house. So, I've been finding that it's not so easy for me to write the heavy, angsty young adult novels that I used to
Yeah.
write because I don't live with them anymore. So, I don't
Mm,
have that ready pool of information to tap into.
yeah.
And I'm getting a little burnt out from it. Writing books like Some Boys takes a lot out of me
Oh,
emotionally too.
wow.
They're very deep and they're painful. And
Mm,
I didn't want to keep writing books that were painful. I wanted to write things that left people on the happier side. So I said, I'm going to
mm,
try. And I don't know much about rom coms, but I decided, you know what? I think I'm going to give this a try because I love watching the Hallmark Christmas movies every year. I find them they're so funny. They're very predictable. They're kind of like dessert in a way, empty
mm.
calories. There's not a lot of like drama in them. They're just fun.
Yeah.
Maybe I could write one that's sort of the opposite of that, where this I have a young girl and she has a Christmas name,
Yeah.
Noel, and she also has a Christmas birthday. So she's
Oh,
had
wow.
Christmas up to here. She's done with Christmas. For her 18th birthday, she begs her parents to do a special outing for her and her friends and no Christmas allowed. And her parents agree, but
Wow.
then her brother comes home from college with his roommate. And his roommate is sort of the poor little rich boy stereotype where, he's been raised by staff and everything is farmed out. Nothing is like meaningful in his world. Once her parents discover he's never had a traditional, good old fashioned family Christmas, they pull out
Wow.
all the stops and she's
Wow.
forced to do Christmas against her will. And so she makes life miserable for everyone around her.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
where Miss was born. She literally grabs a picket sign and she starts walking in front of the house about how December birthdays are getting no attention and it's not fair. So we have our main character who is Noel, and she is basically striking against all these things for Christmas. She doesn't want to build snowmen. She doesn't want to do gingerbread cookies or wrap presents or trim a tree, but her parents insist.
Oh,
So she puts
wow.
her own spin on every one of these activities. So every one of these activities is sort of her little attempt at striking back. So she
Mm.
decorates her tree as a birthday theme instead of a Christmas theme, and her gingerbread house is on the back cover of the book. You can see she smashes it with an ornament.
Oh, so
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So everything that she is forced to do, she does it grudgingly and puts her little birthday strike spin on it. And in the process, she and Quentin, who is her brother's roommate,
Mm.
become very good friends and maybe a little bit more.
I love your answer to that, really. So much interesting. I love the fact you had to leave us with that cliffhanger. Quite beautiful.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit more, you know. Quite nice. Thank you. And also, Patty, one of the things I found quite interesting about your writing is the fact that your characters feel so real and complex, especially in books like Some Boys and Sand. I wanted to ask you, do you draw inspiration from real life experiences, or do your
Yes.
characters just show up fully formed in your head? And
Wow.
and you can also tell us about the making of Sand too, if
That's a
well.
really good question. So Dan and Send, he did come to me almost fully formed, but I
Wow.
think that was over a number of years because this was, that was my debut novel, my
Yeah.
first foray into publishing. So I had plenty of time to really work and hone and develop that character. But I would say all of my characters are based somewhat on real life experiences. Not
Mm.
all, right? There's a little bit of me in every one of them, but they're not autobiographical.
Yeah.
What I try to do is give every character a dilemma, right? Like from page one, there has to be a very clear dilemma.
Mm.
For Ian and Some Boys, that was, who do I believe? Do I believe Grace or do I believe my best friend Zach? For Dan and Send, Dan has another dilemma. All right. So Dan was a bully when he was
Wow.
younger. When he was 13, he did something so bad, he
Mm.
had to change his name and his parents had to flee because it was either that or he was never going to be left alone. So
Mm.
on his first day of school, he witnesses somebody being bullied. So he has
Wow.
another dilemma. Do I step in or do I ignore it?
Mm.
Right? What do
Wow.
I do? Okay, so I always give them, like literally in the opening scene, I give them a dilemma that's so big, so important, it shapes the entire rest of the story. So
Wow.
Dan does step in. He does stop this attack because it would have been a bloodbath if he had allowed it to continue.
Yeah.
And it nearly ruins his life all over again. Right. So, and then, like, similarly in Some Boys, Ian in Some Boys is
Yeah.
facing, he has a very close core group of friends. He is a
Mm.
member of the lacrosse team in his high school, and he has just suffered another concussion. So this is multiple concussions for him, which could
Mm.
mean the end of his athletic career. And
Wow.
he's furious over this. He's very upset. He doesn't know what he's going to do with himself if he can't play.
Mm.
And he ends up making a very poor decision that gets him benched. And
Mm.
this is what I'm saying. Every one of them faces a dilemma, a decision where their actions then sort of open the story.
Mm.
And I think
Wow.
that's very important. I like to give the characters agency. I also like to give them consequences to those decisions and then kind of let them figure out a way out of what mess they've created as a result. That's how I think they feel real. And I think that's very
Wow.
important because we're all teenagers. And I think that's
Yeah.
realistic because teenagers are not full grown adults yet. So they are
Yeah.
going through mistakes. And I
Yeah.
want my readers to see that it's okay to screw up. It's
Mm.
okay as long as you own it, right?
Mm.
You own it and you take steps to correct it. That's what I want them to see when they close my book.
Wow, I love your take on that, really. That's quite beautiful and quite
Thank you.
fun. It's just so lovely. Are you able to delve into these characters and live them in quite in a memorable manner? Because even me as a person, one of the things I love when it comes to novel and storytelling, characters that last so well with you. One that after finishing the book, you can still relate. After finishing the book, you can still feel the emotion of what they passed through. After you're done with the book, you can still like feel, oh wow, that was such an heavy one. That was so impactful. That was so amazing. A one that leaves a memorable stink in the heart
Yes,
of the reader. It's a
yes,
lovely one. That's
yes.
quite what
Thank
you've
you.
done,
Thank
really,
you.
there.
That is exactly my attempt. You know, that's my goal with all of these novels is I want them to feel memorable. I
Mm,
want them to feel real. But ultimately, I want my readers to feel safe. Like, in other words,
mm,
they went on this ride with that character so
mm.
that they hopefully will not make that same mistake.
Absolutely. I love
They
that.
learn without being beaten over the head with a boring lecture
Yeah.
or a scolding, right? So they got to experience the all the angst and the drama and the tears and the pain without
Mm,
truly leaving their homes, right?
yeah.
So it's sort of like I've lived vicariously through you, and now I know better. You've taught
Mm.
me what not to do.
Absolutely. I love that, really. Thank you so much for sharing, Party. And now I'd like us to shift a bit, yeah, into readers' feedbacks, because one of the things that intrigue me most about writing, about literature, is feedbacks. The stands whereby I can sit down and fold my hands and watch different readers drop in their ideas, throw in their reviews and feedbacks on a book that they've just finished reading. And sometimes you may want to agree with me that sometimes the readers might get the message intended by the author. Sometimes they might not get the message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be close to getting it, and sometimes they might just hilariously misunderstand it and interpret it quite upside down. And as hilariously fun as this sound, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does that make you feel as a writer?
That's another really great question, Peter. Honestly, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before, and I think it's really important because, yeah,
Wow.
and this is advice that I give to new authors, right? I have to be very careful about the reviews that I read because they can suck the soul out of me or suck the joy out of writing
Mm,
because readers get very invested. These characters become real to them, right? They
mm,
fall in love with your characters. So
yeah.
for them, they're real people and they feel sort of like an ownership over them, even though they come out of my mind. For the person who's reading that book, they paid for this book. This book is now theirs. They own it, not me.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
something I had to learn. It took me a while to learn and accept that
Mm,
once
I
I
love that.
release that book out into the world, it is no longer my property,
Yeah.
right? It belongs to each reader. So each reader is
Yeah.
free to interpret the story as they will, right? So I look at it this way, right? So look, we were just talking about how characters need to feel real, and I
Yeah.
always give them a dilemma to face.
Yeah.
The dilemma that they face is born out of their backstory, their past.
Mm,
Every one of us, we walk through life, and this is really good advice. We have no idea what the person sitting beside us has experienced or survived,
mm.
right? So that experience, that lived experience, is going to shape the lens that they look
Oh, wow.
at
I
the world
love
through.
that. Mm,
So here's the thing: if you've got a person who's scarred, right, like Grace in Some Boys, all right, she's been sexually assaulted by someone she has known most of her life. She
yeah.
is not going to trust people very easily.
At all.
Now,
Mm,
if you look at somebody like, well, let's say Noel, right? This is a comedy. Noel in this book is
mm,
just, she's feeling very ignored and
mm,
invisible, right? And see, there's part of Patty shining through there too. Her parents are just not hearing her, right? So
mm.
she's now forced to take these extreme measures to get people to listen to her, right?
Attention.
I'm looking at that as the same reaction in my readers. My
Mm,
readers are going to look at these stories and they're going to bring their lived experiences to what
into
they're
it.
reading. They may
Absolutely.
either identify with the character or they may hate one of my characters because they themselves wouldn't respond that way. And
Mm,
that's perfectly fine. It was
Absolutely.
something I had to learn, though, as an author, that I can't take that personally,
Mm,
right? How a person interprets a story is their lived experience, that they own that. So I no longer get upset when people say to me, "Oh my God, I hate this character. How could you do this?" Well, I did it because that was what, the story needed. It wasn't designed to hurt you personally because I didn't know you existed, right? And I've had people say things like that to me. I've
yeah,
had feedback from readers tell me that, "Oh, Grace helped me so much find the courage to speak up." That's wonderful. I'm
that's
thrilled to hear
amazing.
that. That's
Yeah.
part of what I want to hear.
Mm.
But I've also had other readers come back and say, "It sounds like you're vilifying all boys." And
Wow.
I try not to take that personally now, because when I'm not vilifying them at all. I'm trying to get them to see that some of them are silent and they're defending the boys that are doing these horrible behaviors.
Yeah.
And that is okay. Right. So if those boys like Ian tell their friends, "Call 911. What do you think you're doing? She's not a party favor. You don't get to
Yeah,
pass her.
you know.
She's unconscious."
Mm,
If more boys did that, we would have a lot fewer of these sexual assaults.
absolutely.
Right? I don't control everybody else's feelings. Everyone's
Mm.
entitled to their own reactions. All I can do is just give them an entertaining story.
That's amazing. I love that about you. I love that about your storytelling. I love that about your books. And it's just so beautiful and quite fun. And the way with which some of the things you've mentioned so far are like societal issues, are like
Yes.
societal things that happen in the society. And through your book, you're more like you're activing. You're more like an activist. You're more like you're trying to pass a message to people out there. These are the things we want an adjustment. These are the things that we don't want to see happens much further in the future. These are the things that we're trying to eradicate. These are the things we're trying to push. These are the things we're trying to let people be aware, raising awareness and let them be aware of things like this. These are
Exactly.
quite beautiful, really. I love your take on that. I'm just reading here, like, how do you respond to people who propose banning your book because of their subject matter? Has that anything of
Oh,
that nature happened to you?
yes, too many
Wow.
times, and it breaks
Wow.
my heart. Breaks my
Wow.
heart. So I actually now I do have a full-time day job, which is why you and I are talking on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And when each of these novels have come out, I usually get inundated with requests from teachers, librarians. "Please come speak to our school, our class, our book club."
Yeah.
So I was invited by a local Hebrew school to come and address bullying at their school. And I had to take time off from work to do
Wow.
this. And I
Wow.
was literally on the way there. I was in my car on my way there when my cell phone rang and they canceled the event because I used the word fuck in the novel. And I'm like,
Really?
"Okay, wait, I'm so confused. In other words, you're telling me you didn't read the novel?" "No, we didn't read it. A parent complained." "But you wanted me to come speak to your students and you didn't know what I wrote." Yeah. Okay, well, that sounds like a
Wow.
you problem. Okay. So I had turned around and went home, but I was very
Wow.
upset with it because, again, profanity to me is real. Okay. There are many young teens, young adults that use profanity. So my goal as an author is to make my novels feel and sound as realistic as possible. So yes, there's profanity in them. I deliberately toned down the violence, right? So the rape is not depicted in some boys. It's talked about, but it's never described on the page.
Mm,
So some boys has been banned. Someone I used to know has been banned in 3 different school districts in Florida, and I believe one in Utah. Now, here's another interesting story. Right before we went to publication, I mentioned my main character, he and his family changed their names and they moved away to
yeah.
escape all of the negative publicity. The name that
Mm,
they chose was originally different than what's in the published version of the book. And we had a tragic story here on the east coast of the states right around the time that the book came out, in which a Rutgers University student was recorded without his knowledge by his college roommate, and that recording was put on social media against his knowledge. Right
wow.
when that story broke, he jumped off the George Washington Bridge to his death.
Oh, jeez.
So my character had his last name. So 3 weeks before this book came out, I changed his last name because I did not want to capitalize
Okay.
any
Yeah.
way or have anyone think
And they
that
will
I
never,
was
and they
capitalizing
will
off
never
of
know
that.
that it's more like a coincidence. They wouldn't know
It was a
about that.
total
Yeah.
right, total coincidence. But I
Yeah.
didn't want that to. I just didn't want that family's pain to be made worse by this book.
Yeah.
And then I felt bad because I'm like, oh, okay, who am I? I am not a household name. That I felt that might be a little too much hubris there, that to assume that anybody was going to even know about this book. But I didn't want to give anyone that impression, so we
Mm.
changed their name. But yeah, there are so many ways in which a book or a novel can impact, readers, young adults. I I just find it so wrong. To me, it's just sinful that adults are gatekeeping these novels without having read them first,
Mm.
right? So if they read them first, I think they would see that there is no pornography in my novels.
Oh,
There's no
yeah.
sex in them. There's barely a kiss. Yes, there's profanity. Yes, there's some violence in terms of fighting,
Mm.
but they're real, and the message is always positive at the end. There's
Oh,
no reason to ban these books. And I just feel that, like, in a society that is faced with so many issues right now, like
a lot.
violence, like rampage shooters, we're
Shooting.
banning a book, but not the weapon. We're banning
Mm.
free speech. We're banning thought.
You can
There's
imagine.
something wrong here,
Something is
right? So,
wrong. A
right,
lot is
there's
wrong.
something here. So I'm fundamentally against book banning. And now what I've done to sort of mitigate this and make sure that this doesn't happen again, where I'm invited to speak at some event only to have it canceled minutes before I'm due. I now, on my website, I post the first chapters of all of my books for free. So teachers, librarians, parents can read them for themselves
Mm.
and see if they object to the content that's inside them. I even have educator guides, I have discussion guides. I've even started doing my own sort of rating system, right? So
Wow.
let me back up. I'm also against rating systems. I don't like to call books clean or dirty because
Yeah.
that's a subjective term, right? So what I do is, on my website for each novel, I will let parents know this book has profanity and these are the terms. Like,
Mm.
I will say, yes, this book has the F word. The ghost story, my main character, Riley, isn't certain he believes in God,
Wow.
and he admits that on the page. So I actually say that on the website, that he has a crisis of faith, because that could be very polarizing to some readers.
Yeah.
And of course, the sexual content, right? So the sexual content in some of the books, again, I don't write on-screen sex because
Oh,
they're young adults, right? So I don't feel it's my job to teach them how to have sex. That's not what I write.
yeah.
If I ever were to write a story in which the two main characters have sex as part of their development, I
Mm.
would approach it very cautiously for that reason, because I don't feel it's my job to teach teenagers that. Dan and Send does indeed have sex with a young girl, but it's off page. It's
Mm.
literally, you turn the page, they're done, they're getting dressed. There's no
Mm.
description of body parts, nothing, right? So I will talk about that on the website. That, yes, we talk about sex, but it's alluded to. It's not described in graphic detail.
Mm.
There's profanity. These are the words. There's a problem with religion, where one of the characters says he doesn't believe in God or the afterlife. And I let parents know,
No.
if you object to any of this, read the book first with your child
Mm.
and then have discussions about it. That this author doesn't share our morals. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Don't make it impossible for everyone to read it just simply because you object to it. To do that is anti-American. It's a slap in the face of free speech and
Just slap to the face,
freedom
really.
of expression. And I am fundamentally opposed to that on every level.
Mm. It's truly a slap to the face, really. And just like you mentioned, people going about banning books that are supposed to be out there, while there are much more important things, much more deadlier things, much more, things that needs to be banned that are causing harm to the society, and they left that ongoing. And it's more like politics. There's a whole lot of things wrong with the society and even wrong with the world in general, really. Things are going wide and, we
No,
need help.
and quite honestly, Peter, the more you tell me you're not allowed to read a book, I guarantee you I'm going to read it now. That's it. You just told
Right.
me I can't. My
Then
response
I
is
said, I
watch
can.
me, watch me. You cannot stop that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, I don't, I object strenuously to people telling
Yeah.
me I'm not allowed to do something. I will therefore do it just on principle. But
Mm.
yes, so I mean, my undying gratitude goes out to school librarians because they're usually the ones who are putting these books in the hands of my audience, which are about, I would say, anywhere from 13 to 18-year-old students. So they get all my thanks, my love, because I know that they have a very tough job right now, that they're trying to appease multiple audiences.
Mm.
And I just wish that, some of the parents that are out there trying to fight against books being on shelves understand that they have every right in the world to forbid their own child not to read
Mm.
something, but they don't
Wow.
have that right to extend that on everybody.
Absolutely. I love your take on that. That's quite amazing and quite wholesome and quite enlightening as well. Thank you for mentioning. And now, just apart
Thank
from
you.
the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
What am I working on now? So remember, I was saying to you that my children are grown. They left the
Yeah,
house.
yeah,
Let me see if you see this picture. You see right over my shoulder there? That's one of my
yeah. The one
boys.
by the wall.
Yes, right. So they're all grown up now. They're in their 30s, and one lives
Wow,
out of state. He lives down in North Carolina, and my
wow,
other one lives in a few towns over. So I go weeks without seeing them, and it hurts. But this is
um,
life. This is the circle of life, right? So now that I'm an empty nester, and I said, okay, it's time for me to maybe
you call
grow
yourself
up.
an empty nester.
Yes, I'm an empty nester, so it's time for my writing to grow up and change with me. So I may be hanging up my young adult novelist typing fingers, and I'm now branching out into adult fiction. So I'm working on what I think will end up being a political thriller. It's
Wow.
called For His Honor. And this is a story about a mayor of a fictional city in Massachusetts who is 6 months into his term and discovers the city has what they think is a serial killer on the loose.
Mm,
And since he ran on a platform of being tough on crime, he decides to appoint a task force to bring this killer to justice. And as they're working, discovers that there is a personal connection to this killer
mm.
that he now must manage, because if that story breaks, it's going to be the end of his political career. So yes, that I'm about maybe I would say, I don't know if I'm halfway through it yet. I've got about
Oh,
50,000 words written, but I don't feel it's done.
wow.
So it's either going to be a big book or it's going to end up being several books. I'm not quite certain
Serious.
yet.
Oh,
Yeah, but I'm
wow.
having fun with it because now I get to write sex on the page because this is an adult story and it's
Yeah.
full of humanity and there's a lot of intrigue and double crossing because it's all politics. So and it's a lot of research for me to do. So it's a
Yeah.
whole different genre for me. And it's right now it's reinvigorating my love of writing
Mm.
and it's keeping me busy. Right.
Oh,
It's keeping me
interesting.
like, yes, it's keeping me busy instead of like getting upset about the state of my country right now. So
Yeah,
I'm really, really enjoying it. I hope to do more of this, and if I can find a way to spin this into a series, I think
Mm.
that would be better. And
Wow.
so I've been trying to think of some ideas for that, like maybe each member of the task force that he appoints gets to star as the main character in their novel.
Mm.
So then I would have to stretch the apprehension of the killer out over multiple novels,
Mm.
which means I have to come up with something else to fill each book.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts to this,
Yeah,
and
I
it's a
love
lot of
that.
fun.
I love that. That's quite amazing, really. You've got a lot ongoing, and that's quite commendable. I hope you find some time to sleep, really.
Yes,
That's
yes.
quite a lot, really, you've got ongoing. Quite wonderful. Well done. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons I think writers need to be praised more for their works. There needs to be, shown more accolades for their works because all of these things take a lot of time and it's just a
They
lot of work
do.
involved.
I'm a very, very slow writer. As I mentioned, I do have a full-time job,
Yeah.
and that keeps me very busy. And I also suffer from an autoimmune disease that makes
Mm.
life very painful at times. So I
Wow.
don't get to write every single day anymore. I used to write every day, rain or shine. And as I get older, I'm finding it more challenging to do that.
Mm,
So I think I've been working on this novel for about 2 years now, and it's
wow.
not done. Yeah. So
Wow.
it takes me a very long time to finish a book these days.
Interesting. Wow, that's got a lot. Yeah, just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of any of your books. On what platform are they available on for purchase?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, so all of the young adult novels were originally published by Source Books, Fire. I don't believe they're out of print, so I think Amazon and used bookstores and certainly libraries will have them.
Yeah.
And the two newest novels, the Mistletoe's Comedy and The Smell of Smoke and Ash Paranormal, are self-published, so they are right now Amazon exclusives.
Mm,
And I actually have three novels that are adult romance.
wow,
They were published by the Thule Publishing Group, and they are also available on Amazon.
interesting. That's amazing, really. I'd like you to show them to the camera once again, one after the other.
Sure.
Yeah.
So here's Send. That was the first one. That's my
Yeah.
book baby. That was the debut novel that
Ah,
made my dreams of being a published author come true.
come true.
Yeah. Some Boys, as we talked about, that was my third novel.
Yeah,
That was the one I wrote in record time. I was able to write that one in about 2 months.
that was
And
amazing.
this is the companion to that one. Someone I
Someone I
used
used to
to
know.
deals with the same
Mm,
subject matter as Some Boys, but from a different perspective. And
mm,
then the two self-published books. I have The Smell of Smoke and Ash
interesting.
and Mistletoes.
Interesting. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Party Blunt's books directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles and also on our website. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Patty, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say it's so great, lovely, amazing, animated, and quite lively having this conversation again around your beautiful titles. Thank you once again for coming on.
Thank you. I really enjoyed myself. So thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you today.
It's my pleasure, really.